Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Toronto Maple Leafs trade deadline preview. We are pleased to be joined by Mr. Sam Hill of Carleton University. So we're going to talk about the Leafs deadline plans, maybe get some insights from someone who maybe follows the team a little bit closer than maybe we do, given that he is a Leafs fan. But first things first, Sam, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Good, yeah. Appreciate it. Excited to be on. I've just added a little bit more to my credentials. I do write about the Leafs for the morning skate, so I'm not just a random guy off the street, even though I may look like it.
For sure. So let's get into it. Like the most polarizing team in the league, so there's no shortage of topics ever with Toronto. Lot of options for them going into the deadline. Maybe not in terms of cap space, but in terms of avenues they could go to improve their team, because they do have a couple of significant needs. I would say, generally, mainstream media always thinks Toronto needs a defenseman. I personally disagree with that, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on maybe what some of the more significant, or maybe the most significant need for Toronto is.
For sure. I think, as you said, the narrative around the team, ever since Matthews really got drafted, in that first year with Babcock, has been they've been bad defensively, and that's a fact for most of Babcock's era, and just probably the start of Keith's era too. But I think over the last 2 years specifically, the team as a whole has really buckled down, and you can see in the stats defensively this year, they're top 5 in goals against, I think, and 6th in expected goals against. So they're clearly doing things right. It's more offensively for me, and for I'd say a lot of Leafs fans, when you look at the top 6, you have the big 4, Tavares, Matthews, Marner, Nylander, and then Bunting's been great as well. But there's that second line left wing spot where it's just a revolving door of guys who don't really do that much. Alex Kerfoot, Kyle Yarncrux, they've tried to force Nick Robertson into that spot and hope that he'd work out, but none of them really have. So I think, if we're looking at just one, if we're saying you'd add one player to the Leafs to make them a better team, I'd definitely say top 6 left wing would be the position I'd prioritize.
That's definitely on par with some of the discussions that Ryan and I have had over the past couple of weeks whenever Toronto's come up.
I would say that's definitely what we agree upon too. I mean, just looking at their defense, I don't think it's nearly as bad as people say, especially with Liljegren and Sandin continuously getting better.
It's not bad at all.
Yeah, and they're just going to continually get better too. So
exactly, your worry. Liljegren and Sandin statistically are their best pairing. Your worry is that they're, both 22, 23-year-old kids with not a lot of playoff experience. But I think if you want them to be your future, which by all accounts is what they're going to be in terms of 2 of the mainstays of the top 4, they need to sort of show that, and they deserve that chance because they played very well this season.
Okay, so top 6 left winger. I'm sure you're familiar with some of the big names that are on the trade market lately. So let's just get right into it and dive in. Do you think Timo Meier is a realistic option for the Toronto Maple Leafs in the year 2023?
I do. I do think he's realistic. Realistic and likely are a bit different. I think he's realistic for a couple of reasons. The first is that he's obviously, he doesn't make that much money. I don't have the exact number. I think it's around 6 or low 6 is 6. Yeah. So look, if San Jose's in a position where I think they're willing to retain at least a little bit. The Leafs have their first round pick, which is obviously a must. They do have prospects. Robertson is one that comes to mind. There are a couple other A-, B+ level prospects that, like Topi Niemela and players like Fraser Minton, that could interest the Sharks. And I do think that, again, they probably can't put the best package together, looking at teams like New Jersey and Carolina with the depth that they have in prospects, and they're probably willing to spend more. But the Leafs could, again, if the Sharks retain salary, the Leafs send someone like Kerfoot back to sort of help out with that. There's no reason why they couldn't get Meier for this playoff run and then flip him in the summer as an RFA, because they'll have his rights, and recoup some of the assets that they traded in the first place, right? Which has been talked about a lot. And I think that made sense.
Yeah, you just made Mitchell light up. That's been his theory going here for a while.
I wasn't sure if that was something that like a lot of people have been talking about. I kind of threw it out there a week or so ago that like Meyer's not a rental. You can treat him as a rental, but then he's not just going to walk. Like you can trade his rights, and rights are a significant asset. An asset to a player like that.
I don't think Dubas looks at him as a rental. You know, Dubas has said he doesn't want to trade he doesn't want to trade first round picks or hell of a prospects for rentals, but I don't think he's referring to Meyer in that sense, because obviously Dubas is a lot smarter than all of us, but he understands that Meyer is not just a UFA who's going to walk in the summer automatically, right? Like, worst comes to worst, they hit a dead end with Matthews, or they hit a dead end with Nylander, and they still have a chance to sign Meyer and use some of that cap, or whatever happens. You never know what's going to happen, right? And the cap's going up, so really, you trade for Meyer and you figure it out after, in my opinion.
And that's kind of what's been said. I think I can't remember who might have said it. It might have been like on 32 Thoughts, something like that.
Yeah,
they mentioned that Dubas should like basically make the trade, like improve your team as much as possible and deal with it. Kick the can down the road to the summer.
Mm-hmm.
Ryan, you got something?
Yeah, I'm just curious. Like you listed off a few of their prospects there that may be up for discussion. What about a player like Matthew Knies? Do you think they ever consider trading him, or is he too important for their future?
Knies is obviously the guy that holds the most value, and the guy that every Leafs fan will talk about is, you know, we can't trade this guy, and Dubas says it a lot too. I think Knies is an interesting case because obviously he wasn't a top 10, even top 15 pick. Like, the Leafs are very good at finding, for the most part, very good at finding value in the draft, and Knies is one of those players. He's a mid-second rounder. He had a really good year last year from the University of Minnesota, and he's been pretty good this year. He's just above a point per game. But the thing about Knies is, I mean, what I find interesting is he's third in scoring on his college team behind Jimmy Snuggerud and Logan Cooley, and he plays with those two, who are obviously two very well-renowned prospects. So I do think there's a bit of overhype for Knies. And if you can sort of strike where the iron's hot, if people think that Knies is some sort of elite top 6 prospect, again, it's you don't want to do it for rental, and that makes sense. But you shouldn't be making guys like Knies untouchable, in my opinion. Especially when like Matthews and Nylander's contracts are coming up, so you're not sure how many more chances you're going to get with this core. Right. Exactly. You got to maximize your window. That's all that the NHL is about, right? So.
It's essentially the same thing we've been saying with McDavid and Draisaitl too. Like, how have they not made a major move for a defenseman in their case, right? Like, it's the same thing. You need to make the moves to make the Stars happy. So we've kind of talked about Meyer, not necessarily a rental, but probably a one playoff run type of acquisition, unless Dubas does something crazy. Maybe pivoting over to maybe a less realistic option, less of a need, but a guy with term, like a Jacob Chychrun, who's he's been in rumors for over a year now, and there's been a few times I can recall where the Leafs have been significantly connected to Jacob Chychrun, whether necessary or not. How would you feel, Sam, as a fan, and maybe looking at the cap, if Toronto made a trade for Chychrun, not in the sense of obviously he'd help you for this playoff run, but how it might affect cap space down the road in order to sign your Nylander and your Matthews, who are going to get significant raises in a year and a half? Yeah, so Chychrun's obviously probably the most interesting guy. Like, I mean, he's been talked about, as you said, like just nonstop in trade talks, and it made sense as to why. I mean, he is such a good player on just an abhorrent NHL team, and he's asked for a trade for a while. And I mean, the thing with the Leafs, and you touched on it a little bit, but I think Chychrun made sense in the sense that if you're looking to get rid of Justin Hall, who's expiring in the summer, Brody has a year left after this year, and you just signed Riley to a monster contract, so you're sort of locked in there. But does Chychrun immediately help his team? Yes, but does he help them enough that it makes sense to give up significant assets? As you said, when you're in a position where you don't know how much more you're getting out of Nylander or Matthews, I don't think so. I really like a trade for Jake McCabe, who we might talk about later, or Chychrun in the summer, because I think at that point you have a clearer idea of
what your team's going to look like down the road. But I think with it like being held to the barrel at the trade deadline by Arizona just doesn't seem like a smart move for a guy that is probably not going to impact your playoff chances that much.
So, Ryan, do you got anything to expand on that?
I just think, I don't think it makes a ton of sense for them either. Like looking at it right now, like you said, they just locked Riley in, and then if they have Sandin, Liljegren as part of their future, Brody, how much term does Brody have left?
So he's got 1 year after this.
Okay.
So same timeline as Matthews and Nylander.
They got a lot of money coming off the books next summer.
Yeah, it makes
Matt Murray too. So there's another 5.
So let alone defense
and Muzzin. Holy crap, Muzzin too. Sorry.
Yeah, that's so good. So let alone defense not being like your number one priority right now, it just doesn't make a ton of sense to add money that is firmly on the books for a couple more years when you have so much to figure out, right? So I don't think it makes a ton of sense for the Leafs. But
so Sam, you mentioned Jake McCabe. That's definitely a guy that's going to get moved. Do you have any others like ideas for players that you'd want to see Toronto go after at the deadline that maybe we haven't mentioned yet?
Here's the thing. I mean, McCabe makes sense again I see why people like him. He's a smart player. He's physical. He plays that playoff style of hockey for whatever that's worth. But again, and in terms of like forwards, I'd say there's guys like Ivan Barbashev is someone that I touched on an article recently who plays for the Blues. He had a career high in points and goals last year. He's a rental. I don't think he costs very much. He interests me mostly because he isn't really good at that many things on the ice, but he's really good at scoring goals, and he's a really above average finisher, which is something the Leafs severely lack in their bottom 6, with guys like David Camp and Pierre Engvall, who are really nice defensively and really nice possession-wise with the puck, but they're just not going to score a ton of goals 5-on-5. And in the playoffs, when things go badly or when things are really struggling for the top guys, you need players to score goals at even strength. And Alex Turfa, Calle Ontrack, these guys have 8 goals combined in over 100 playoff games. So at this point, anyone that can score goals at a decent rate in the NHL is just someone I look at.
Are you aware that Jake McCabe has 2 years left at $4 million after this year?
Yeah, I think he's a similar boat to Chychrun, right?
Yeah, like very, just a worse player though. I hadn't seen I've seen Jake McCabe's name out there in connection to teams that need a defenseman, but I don't know if I love him at that number and that term.
Yeah,
especially for a team like Toronto. So that'd be interesting. Sort of circling back, you mentioned like Kerfoot, Engvall, kind of all the guys who make middling money for Toronto. If you had to see one of those, like if you had to shed one of those guys, because Toronto, they've only got $1 million in cap space, 1.1, and that's with Muzzin on LTIR. Assuming he's not back till playoffs, if he's back at all. I'm not terribly sure about his injury situation. You might know better. Who's the guy that's making $1, $2, $3 million on the roster that you would want to see go in a trade?
I think, just to start off with the Muzzin point, I don't think Muzzin is coming back potentially ever. Okay. Just from what all accounts I've always heard, he's really not in a good state and not even really thinking about hockey right now. So obviously, just thoughts are with him and just get back to full health as quickly as possible. And in terms of, I think it's a pretty easy answer for any Leafs fan. It has to be Kerfoot, just by the fact that he makes $3.5 million and the other guys don't. Again, Kerfoot's a nice piece to have on your third line when you're not paying, when the cap's a lot, when you have a lot of cap space, or you're not really paying him that much. But for a guy that scores 15 goals a year as a career year, the Leafs just can't really have him making $3.5 million a year. And I think that he's at that number. Again, if you get a guy like Meyer, or even if you want to look at Chychrun and McCabe, that puts them around $4.5 million in cap space, with probably some retention by the team you're trading with. So that gives you a whole a multitude of options to play with, right? So
that could get you a player that makes as much as $10 million, depending on what you're willing to pay.
exactly.
And just so the Leafs took a kind of major gamble in their goaltending situation this offseason, which has paid out pretty well. Like Samsonov has been very solid, on the verge of 20 wins and almost at a .920 save percentage. Murray hasn't been bad when he's been healthy. I guess that's kind of where my question is going, is do you feel that maybe with Murray's inconsistencies in health that Samsonov and maybe a guy like Shalgren is enough to make it through a playoff run?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm very glad you asked this, because I do think it's a bit of an not maybe underrated storyline, but under talked about storyline, because Samsonov has been, at least numbers wise, he has been good enough, and he's been strong. There's no, like, I don't want to disparage him, because there's no reason. He's been great for us, and at that value, at that price, I mean, it's been really a savior, especially with how inconsistent Murray's been with his health and even his play. But when I look at a guy like Karel Vejmelka, I mean, he does interest me. Doesn't really make sense. I don't know, but I don't know how much trust I have in Ilya Samsonov winning a Stanley Cup. Just I'd have to do more research into like his playoff numbers and his overall play. But I do see him sort of as similar to Jack Campbell, where he's not going to really win you any games in the playoffs, and you really just need him to play good enough. I'm not so confident in him being able to do that for 4 rounds.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense.
Maybe to sort of expand the question a little bit, just maybe taking the eye off of the deadline and just focusing on the summer. Samsonov's RFA after this season, just like maybe just in your opinion, like what do you think a contract looks like for him, and what would you be comfortable with seeing Toronto give him if you think they even retain him?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, if he keeps this play up, let's say he ends the year with a .920, like he's probably going to want a pretty good share, and people will pay a lot for goalies. Like that's just how the NHL is. You need a great goalie to be good. And I mean, my ideal contract for him would be something similar to what we gave Peter Mrazek last year, which the name Peter Mrazek will bring nightmares to every Leafs fan. But I think that like 3 years, I think it was like $3.8 million. Samsonov, you got to reward him for his play, and it's not like, again, you can't trust Matt Murray to be healthy and consistent for an entire year. You just can't. I think it was a shrewd move by Dubas, but you just can't have that faith in him. If Samsonov wants more than that, I say, you know what, fair enough, you deserve it, and go get as much as you can in the market.
He's also 25, so there's like a lot less of a risk factor too. Like, how old's Mrazek? I'm just bringing him up right now. Born in 92, so he's 31. He would have been probably either 29 or 30 when he signed that deal with the Leafs. Like, a lot more risk with that than it would be signing what would be a 25 or 26-year-old Samsonov. For
sure, and I think, I mean, the problem with the Leafs is, again, they have these Matthews and Nylander deals that are always in the back of Dubas' mind that you always have to think about. So how much do you want to commit to a goalie when you have your 2 or your 3 best players that are going to be making an absurd amount of money in the following summer, right? And I mean, hopefully Gary Bettman figures a couple things out and bumps that cap up for us, but you can't really rely on that because you just never know.
Okay, so let's continue with non-deadline stuff, because I love talking about like contract extensions and stuff, and I'm looking to get I want to get your thoughts. Was it Kyprios? He's not necessarily as touched in as he used to be, but he was the one who floated 8 years, $15 million a year for Matthews, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you think, like, what do you think about that?
Again, it's tough for me to, like, my initial reaction is, okay, 2024, 2025, I guess is when that contract would start. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's crazy to think about. I mean, we saw McKinnon get pretty close to $13 million this year, right? And the cap hasn't moved in 3 years. From everything that I've heard and everything that reporters have been saying, the cap's going to take a pretty big jump soon, if not this year, then the next year. I just think that for a guy who won the MVP last year, he's shown not really many signs of slowing down. Like he's been obviously not as good this year, but I don't think that really means anything other than he's just been a little bit unlucky. I think that's the going rate for him, and if you're not going to pay it, someone else will.
That's the thing.
Exactly.
It's basically, so I think like Ryan and I have talked about this, and our mentality is, would you rather spend the extra, like overpay maybe to keep the player, or let him go get just as much somewhere else?
Yeah,
for sure. And I mean, it's Austin Matthews. Like again, you like LA's not going to be scared of giving him 7 years, 15-5, or 7 years, even 16. Like they'll do whatever they can to get him. The Leafs need to do whatever they can to keep him.
Sort of pivoting over to Nylander now. I floated that if he hits the open market, I think he's pushing 8 figures. Like I think if he hits the open market, he's getting 10 a year.
Oh, for sure.
So
yeah.
Okay, you would agree with that then?
Yeah, I honestly if he hits the open market in 2 years, he's probably going to hit 40 goals this year. Probably going to hit 85, 90 points. I mean, if he replicates that next year or even does a little bit more, 10 mil would be conservative, honestly.
Oh, wow.
I just think that with the way things are going, I think Meier is actually a really interesting discussion, because what he gets this offseason, very similar players, what he gets this offseason will probably be something Nylander's looking at.
Oh, yeah.
Nylander's probably hoping that Meier's getting as much as possible, because I think he sees Meier as a comparable in terms of how many goals they score, like how they help their teams out. I think that, Nylander could easily see 10-5 in a couple of years.
Pasternak too, like that's a guy Nylander's going to look at. He's maybe not on that same level.
I don't think, but he definitely thinks that he is, and I don't blame him. But Past is what the domino that everyone's waiting for sure.
Yeah. He's going to set the market for wingers. Like Kucherov did it whenever he signed his deal at 9.5. Panarin's another one. Like these wingers that are going to be hitting the market in the next few years, Pasternak, Meier, Nylander, are going to look at Panarin and be like, he got 11.6. Like, where's that for me?
That was 3 years ago now too. So
exactly,
we're only going up.
Yeah.
Ryan, do you got one more before maybe I go to the last big one?
Yeah, just kind of going back to the defense for 1 second. It's also not really a deadline-related question, but I'm curious what you've seen from Connor Timmins since coming over, because that was another really smart move, I thought, for basically no price, going the other way, and I thought it was a nice little contract extension that they gave him too. So I'm just curious what you've seen from him.
For sure, I think Timmins has been, like, for a guy who's your 5th, 6th, probably our 7th best defenseman, like, you really can't ask much more of him. Is he a guy who I'd want to see playing big minutes in the playoffs? No, but if he has to fill in for a game because, I don't know, like Liljegren's hurt or Hall's, giving the puck away 3 times against Lightning in the first round, I wouldn't mind seeing Timmins step in. Whereas in the past, like if Martin Marincin stepping in or someone like him, it's a disaster, and the Leafs have to play him 5-10 minutes a game in the playoffs. And again, Timmins at 2 times 1-1 or 1.11 over for 2 years was the deal. I think looking at Justin Hall, who's making $2 million a year, he's coming off the books this summer. I see that as pretty much a direct swap. A guy, and for half the money, I think it was, as you said, a very shrewd move by Dubas.
Yeah.
And he's a Sioux guy, so
yeah,
we love that.
Classic.
Exactly.
Ryan, do you maybe have one more before I hit him with the biggest question yet?
No, I think this is a good transition because he already brought up Tampa.
He did bring up Tampa. All right. It is February 16th as we record this. It'll be a different day when we put it out, but it's February 16th right now. And Toronto and Tampa are on a crash course for first round part 2. Do you feel more, less, or just as confident as you did last year?
Yeah, I think it's pretty set in stone. We're seeing them again.
Oh, it's happening. Yeah.
That's an interesting question. It's hard to really say that I'm confident as a fan of a team that's lost in the first round for 6 consecutive years, considering we're playing the team that has just made the Stanley Cup final for the 3rd year in a row. But I'm about as confident as you can be. I do think that, look, hockey in the playoffs is just obviously a game of breaks. And if the breaks bounce your way, last year we didn't get that in Game 6 or Game 7 with a couple of, interesting referee decisions, and Vasilevsky showed up. Am I terrified of Vasilevsky? Like, yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
You have the superior goalie in the playoffs, your odds shoot up by a ton. And they have that. They have the depth, obviously. And I think that to not tiptoe around your question, I'd say I'm more confident just because I feel like it has to happen at some point. I'd be extremely confident if the Leafs traded for someone of Timo Meier's ilk, even Ryan O'Reilly, someone just to energize the locker room, right? Just for Dubas to say, look, we believe in you guys. We see what you've done this year. For another year, you've been a premier team in the league. We're going to support you, and we're going to mortgage some future to help you try and reach the ultimate goal. I do think that's a big part of it.
So Toronto's currently 11 points back of Boston. That's not happening. And Tampa's 13 points clear of Florida. So It's going to happen. It's just a matter of who's at home for Game 7. And I was going to expand on that question for whether or not you're more or less or just as confident as last year. Is there any particular trade that would improve your confidence? And you kind of mentioned Meier or like a Ryan O'Reilly. Who do you want? Like, just be a fan for a minute and just tell me, like, who do you want?
I truly think that we haven't seen a player of Timo Meier's quality on the trade market at the deadline since Mark Stone. And Mark Stone, everyone imagines Mark Stone to be one of the elite wingers in the league, which he is when he's healthy. I don't know how you can, if you're Dubas, like, just do everything in your power to get Timo Meier, maybe other than giving up Matthew Nyes. But even then, I mean, look, the Leafs have scored one goal or less in their last 5 elimination games, which, I mean, that's just not going to get it done when you look at who their goalie is. You're not going to regularly win games scoring 1 goal in the playoffs. Yes, I understand the arguments that they should be scoring more with their core 4, but look, sometimes, they get shut down. You need depth. You need other guys that can handle the load. And Meier is, by all accounts, been an elite player this year. And I think that if he's available and you have a chance to get him, you have to do it.
I think Timo Meier is a trump card for Toronto. I think if they get Meier, this is just like me sort of bullshitting, but I think if Toronto gets Timo Meier, that guy's scoring like 4 big goals in that series. And like Toronto, I think Toronto's winning that series if they get Timo Meier. Imagine that top 6. Like,
I said it earlier, and I don't mean to rag on these guys, but Kerfoot and Yarn Crook have 8 goals in over 100 playoff games combined. Like, that, you need someone who knows how to score. And as you said, like, you put Timo Meier in a line with John Tavares and Mitch Marner. I mean, that's your second line, and that's pretty hard to stop.
So, first round pick, Matthew Nyes, Kerfoot to match salary, with Meier coming in 50% retained, and maybe a second. Are you doing that if you're Dubas?
I think you have to think about it. I don't know. My first thought, if I'm Dubas, is to try, not to get too NHL GM here, but is to try something a little bit more first round pick plus 2 of your top, maybe your second and your third best prospect, as opposed to Nyes straight away. If Dubas is feeling the pressure and he's seeing other teams make moves, then you have to respond to that. I don't think you can just sit around and with your hands underneath sitting on your hands and just say, we're okay with where we're at with this team. We're going to go into the playoffs without making any moves. I can't see him doing that. We haven't talked about it, but he's on an expiring deal. This is his last chance, potentially his last chance. I think it'd be stupid to let him go, but it could be his last chance to make a trade that really alters this franchise in a historic way, and I think he has to take that opportunity.
Ryan, you got anything else for him?
No, I think this has been a really interesting conversation. Just because like I don't follow the Leafs too closely, so it's really cool to hear somebody, especially kind of agree with us, not just being Sens fans, right? That like we kind of think that they should go after a winger more than a defenseman, and he seems to agree. So it'll be really interesting to see what they do. I would love to see them go for a big splash, like we've kind of alluded to here.
I want to see Meyer. I want to see Meyer wearing a Toronto Maple Leaf jersey on March 4th. I think it'd be so cool. I think it'd be so cool.
It would make my day. They've never done it. I mean, Dewis has never done it. He's traded for Muzzin. He traded for Giordano last year. He traded for Nick Foligno. Like, I'm sorry, it's not a big splash, Kyle. You need to try.
No.
You need to try it once.
Especially on an expiring deal. All right.
Yeah,
Ryan, hit that outro. Oh, wait, no, don't yet. Can you stop it? Sam, we'll give you a minute. Maybe plug yourself a little bit. Tell us where listeners can find you. You mentioned that you've been writing. What's up with you?
Yeah, so write for themorningskate.com. It is it's just a hockey media platform. Bunch of great writers on there. We got a little bit of a community. Trying to post as many articles as I can, especially with the trade deadline playoffs coming up. I'll be very active on there. And you can just follow me on Instagram at Sam Hilsey for all updates on my blog and stuff like that. Or if you just want to talk about the Leafs, I'm always interested to do that. So thanks for having me on, fellas. This was a blast.
Unreal. Thanks for coming on. All right, Ryan, now is the time to hit that outro.
Making me look silly out here, Mitch.
That was me. I'm the one who said stop it. All right, this has been our Toronto Maple Leaf deadline preview. This was Sam Hill. Catch you next time.